My name is Daniel Parker, and up until yesterday, I thought I had it all. At 35, I was proud of what I'd built, a successful career as a graphic designer, a cozy suburban home, and a marriage that felt, for the most part, unshakable. Laura, my wife of 8 years, wasn't just my partner. She was my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone. That morning, my birthday started like so many others had. I woke to the faint smell of pancakes drifting from the kitchen. Laura had a knack for marking special occasions with thoughtful gestures, and as I made my way downstairs, the aroma grew stronger, mingling with the familiar hum of her soft humming. In the kitchen, she was standing by the stove in her usual morning attire, one of my oversized college sweatshirts and leggings. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she was focused on flipping pancakes with the precision of a chef. "Happy birthday, old man," she teased when she noticed me leaning against the doorway. A grin spread across her face as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of me, stacked high with whipped cream and a single candle stuck on top. I rolled my eyes at the old man jab, but I couldn't help smiling. 35 isn't old. I'm still in my prime. "You keep telling yourself that," she laughed, leaning down to kiss me softly on the forehead. "But seriously, I hope you're ready. Tonight's going to be amazing, no arguments." Laura had been planning something big for weeks, but she'd refused to tell me anything beyond the basics. Be ready at 7, wear something nice, and don't ask questions. Anytime I tried to pry, she'd just flash me her trademark smirk and say, "It's a surprise." After breakfast, I settled into my usual routine. I worked on a few client designs, went for a run, and even managed to sneak in an episode of my favorite show. As much as I tried to focus on the day, my thoughts kept wandering to Laura's mysterious plans. She had always been good at surprises, whether it was organizing spontaneous weekend trips or tracking down a rare piece of artwork I'd admired. Whatever she had in store tonight, I knew it would be special. At 6:30, I stepped out of the shower and found an outfit neatly laid out on the bed. A crisp navy blazer, a light gray shirt, and a pair of tailored dark jeans. Next to it was a handwritten note in her elegant cursive. "Can't wait for you to see what I've been working on. You're going to love it. Happy birthday, my love. L." I smiled, feeling a rush of warmth as I got dressed. By the time I came downstairs, Laura was waiting by the door, radiant in a red dress that hugged her figure. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and the faint scent of her perfume, vanilla and jasmine, wafted through the air. "You clean up nicely," she said with a playful wink, handing me the car keys. "But you're driving, and no peeking at the GPS." We pulled into the parking lot of a trendy new bar downtown, one I'd mentioned in passing months ago but never visited. The windows glowed with fairy lights, and laughter spilled out onto the street as we approached. Laura took my hand, leading me inside. At first, I was too busy taking in the cozy upscale vibe to notice anything unusual. Then a sudden roar of voices erupted around me. "Surprise!" I froze, momentarily stunned, as dozens of familiar faces crowded into view. Friends, family, colleagues, even a few old college buddies I hadn't seen in years, filled the space, grinning and raising their glasses. Balloons and banners adorned the walls, and a long table in the center of the room was piled high with gifts. I turned to Laura, utterly floored. She was beaming with pride, her hands clasped together as she watched my reaction. "Happy birthday, Danny," she said softly, leaning in to kiss my cheek. The night unfolded like a dream. Drinks flowed freely, the food was incredible, and the DJ played a perfect mix of my favorite songs. Laura moved through the crowd effortlessly, laughing with old friends and introducing people like the perfect hostess she always was. She seemed genuinely happy, and I couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude for everything she'd done. But as the evening wore on, I started to notice little things. Laura wasn't by my side as much as I expected. She kept disappearing, her phone buzzing in her hand every few minutes. At first, I didn't think much of it. Planning an event like this had to be stressful, and maybe she was handling last-minute details. When I realized she'd been gone for nearly 20 minutes, a faint unease began to settle in my chest. I started looking for her, weaving through clusters of guests. No one seemed to know where she was, and after a while I stepped out onto the balcony to clear my head. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the far corner, her back pressed against the railing. But she wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize had his hands on her waist, their faces inches apart. And then, to my horror, I watched as Laura leaned into him, their lips meeting in a kiss so passionate it made my stomach churn. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they'd turned to stone. Everything around me, the laughter, the music, the faint hum of the city, faded into a dull roar as I stood there, frozen, watching the illusion of my perfect life come crashing down. The shock hit me like a freight train. My breath caught in my throat as I stood on the balcony, paralyzed, staring at Laura and the stranger. The world around me blurred, the muted laughter and music from the party fading into a distant hum. It felt like an out-of-body experience, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. Laura was wrapped around him in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, while his arms locked around her waist. It wasn't an accidental brush of lips or a drunken mistake. It was deliberate, intimate, and full of passion. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest and stomped on. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My brain screamed at me to move, to do something, shout, confront them, leave. But my body refused to obey. Time seemed to stretch, every second dragging out like an eternity. Finally, the man pulled back, saying something I couldn't hear. Laura laughed softly, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch the sound of it. That laugh, so familiar, so warm, felt like a dagger twisting deeper into the wound. I took a step back, my foot scraping against the wooden planks of the balcony floor. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to break the moment. Laura's head snapped in my direction, her eyes locking onto mine. For a split second, her expression was unreadable. Shock, guilt, fear, all flickering across her face in rapid succession. "Danny," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The man turned to look at me, his face calm and composed, as if he didn't have a care in the world. He didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't even seem embarrassed. His confidence only fueled the fire burning in my chest. "Who the hell is this?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Laura stepped forward, raising her hands as if to calm me down. "Danny, it's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," I snapped, cutting her off. "I just saw you making out with him." "How is that not what it looks like?" The man smirked, which only made me want to punch him. "Relax, man," he said casually. "This doesn't have to get ugly." His tone was so infuriatingly nonchalant that I took another step forward, my fists clenching at my sides. Laura quickly moved between us, placing a hand on my chest. "Danny, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. I looked at her, the woman I thought I knew, and felt my stomach churn. "Who is he, Laura?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked away, as if the answer was too shameful to say out loud. That silence was louder than any confession could have been. Unable to stand there any longer, I turned on my heel and stormed back into the bar. The air inside felt stifling, the cheerful atmosphere now sickeningly ironic. I pushed past groups of guests, ignoring their confused glances, until I reached the front door. "Danny!" Laura called after me, but I didn't stop. My vision blurred with unshed tears as I shoved the door open and stepped into the cool night air. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. From Laura, from the party, from everything. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. The realization of what I'd just witnessed crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I sat in the driver's seat for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to process what had happened. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? Was I the last to find out? A sickening thought hit me, making my stomach turn. The party. I remembered the sly smiles, the knowing glances exchanged between some of the guests, the way a few people avoided making eye contact with me when I mentioned Laura earlier in the evening. Had they known? The idea that most of the people in that room, my friends, my colleagues, might have been aware of Laura's infidelity made the betrayal cut even deeper. How could they stand there smiling and toasting me, knowing what she was doing behind my back? I punched the steering wheel in frustration, the pain radiating through my knuckles barely registering. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about trust, about loyalty, about the fragile web of relationships that had suddenly been ripped apart. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping me out of my spiral. I glanced at the screen. It was Laura. I let it ring. The messages started coming in a minute later. Each one lit up the screen with her name, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Instead, I started the car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, though in reality, it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. The city streets blurred past me, a kaleidoscope of neon lights and shadowy corners. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every time I closed my eyes for even a second, the image of Laura wrapped around that man flashed before me, vivid and cruel. Eventually, I found myself parked at the edge of a small, quiet park on the outskirts of town. It was a place Laura and I used to visit when we were dating, a quiet escape from the chaos of city life. We'd spent hours here in the past, lying on the grass, talking about our dreams, and imagining the life we would build together. The irony of ending up here now, of all places, wasn't lost on me. I turned off the engine and leaned back in my seat, staring blankly out the windshield. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. My mind raced with questions, each one sharper than the last. How long had this been going on? Was tonight just a one-time mistake, or was it part of a larger pattern? And, perhaps worst of all, how many people had known? The thought of my friends and colleagues standing in that room, clinking glasses and smiling, made me feel sick. There had been moments throughout the evening, small, fleeting moments, when I'd noticed a strange tension in the air. A few people had exchanged knowing glances when Laura was mentioned. Others had been overly warm, almost sympathetic, when they wished me a happy birthday. At the time, I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. Now, I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and unlocked it, hesitating as Laura's name stared back at me from the list of missed calls. 17. That's how many times she tried to call me since I left the party. There were even more texts, each one starting with her name. Laura. Danny, please answer. I can explain. Laura. I'm sorry. Please just let me explain. Laura. Where are you? I'm so worried about you. I didn't open any of them. I couldn't. The idea of hearing her voice right now, of listening to her try to explain away what I'd seen with my own eyes, was unbearable. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found the name of someone I trusted implicitly. My older brother, Adam. Adam and I had always been close, despite the 7-year age gap. He was the person I turned to when life got complicated, the one who always knew what to say, or when to say nothing at all. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Danny? His voice was groggy, probably woken up by my call. Adam, I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to you. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a shuffling sound as he sat up. What's wrong? Are you okay? No, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I'm okay. Where are you? He asked immediately. I'm at... I hesitated, glancing around the dark park. The old place. The park. I'll be there in 20, he said, no further questions asked. I hung up and leaned back in my seat, staring at the stars through the windshield. The silence was oppressive, amplifying every thought racing through my mind. I wondered if I should have confronted Laura more directly. Should I have demanded answers, or had I been right to walk away? The sound of Adam's car pulling into the lot snapped me out of my thoughts. He stepped out, dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie, his hair messy from sleep, but his expression was sharp, his eyes scanning me with concern. I got out of the car, and as soon as he saw my face, his shoulders tensed. What happened? He asked, his voice calm but laced with urgency. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to a nearby bench and sat down, burying my face in my hands. Adam followed, sitting beside me without saying a word. Finally, I managed to get the words out. She was kissing another man, I said, my voice hollow, at my birthday party, the one she planned for me. Adam exhaled slowly, his hands resting on his knees. Are you sure? I looked at him sharply. Yes, I'm sure. I saw it with my own eyes. She was all over him. He nodded, letting the weight of my words sink in. I'm so sorry, Danny, he said quietly. I can't imagine how that must feel. It's not just that, I continued, my voice trembling. I think, I think other people knew. Some of the guests at the party, they were acting weird, like they were in on it, like they knew what was happening but didn't say anything. Adam frowned, his jaw tightening. That's a hell of a thing to accuse people of. Are you sure you're not just— I'm not imagining it, I snapped, the words coming out sharper than I intended. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like they knew. And if they did, how could they just stand there? How could they pretend everything was fine? Adam didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back on the bench, staring up at the sky. People can be cowardly, Danny, he said finally. Sometimes they see things they don't want to get involved in, so they just look the other way. It's not right, but it happens. His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to argue, to tell him that my friends weren't like that, but the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Adam turned to look at me, his expression serious. You decide what's next. Whether that's confronting her, finding the truth, or walking away altogether, that's up to you. But whatever you do, don't let her or anyone else make you feel like this is your fault. It's not. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed him yet. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air, and I knew the hardest part was still ahead. I didn't sleep that night. After Adam dropped me off at home, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the faint glow of the clock on the wall. Each second that passed felt like a lifetime. My phone buzzed occasionally from the coffee table, Laura's name lighting up the screen again and again, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. The house felt foreign, like I didn't belong there anymore. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall seemed to mock me. They were reminders of a life I thought I understood, a life I thought was stable, honest, and real. Now it all felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of a single lie. Sometime around dawn, exhaustion finally hit me. I lay down on the couch, pulling a blanket over myself, but the moment I closed my eyes, the images came flooding back. Laura's hands on that man's chest, the way she leaned into him, her laughter carrying softly through the night. It was like a cruel, endless loop playing in my mind. I wasn't sure how long I dozed off, but the sound of the front door opening jolted me awake. My heart pounded as I sat up, disoriented, until I saw Laura standing in the doorway. She looked like a mess. Her hair was unkempt, her makeup smudged, and her eyes red and puffy from crying. Danny, she said softly, her voice trembling, I didn't know if you'd be here. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting for her to speak. She stepped closer, hesitating when she saw the coldness in my eyes. I've been trying to call you, she said, her voice breaking. I wanted to explain. Explain, I said bitterly, my voice low. Go ahead, Laura. Explain what I saw last night. Explain how my wife, the woman who planned a party to celebrate me, was out on the balcony making out with another man. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over as she shook her head. It's not what you think, Danny. Please, just let me— Not what I think. I cut her off, my voice rising. Then tell me, Laura, what was it? Because it sure as hell looked like you were cheating on me. She flinched at the word, her shoulders slumping. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Like what? I demanded, standing now, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Tell me the truth, Laura. How long has this been going on? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the floor, her silence speaking louder than words ever could. Answer me, I shouted, the anger bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me. A few months, she admitted finally, her voice trembling. It started a few months ago. The room felt like it spun around me. Months, not days, not weeks. Months. I staggered back, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process what she was saying. Who is he? I asked, my voice hollow. His name is Eric, she said reluctantly. He's someone I met through work. Eric. The name didn't mean anything to me, but the sound of it felt like another stab to the chest. I had always trusted Laura when it came to her job. She worked in marketing, often attending networking events and conferences. I never questioned her late nights or work dinners because I believed in her, believed in us. Does he know you're married? I asked bitterly. Her hesitation was answer enough. Danny, it's not. Don't, I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't try to defend him. Don't try to justify this. I'm not, she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I need you to understand. Understand what? I snapped. That you were bored? That you decided to throw away 8 years of marriage for what? Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you, Danny. I swear I didn't. I stared at her, my anger giving way to something deeper, something darker. Betrayal, yes, but also a profound sense of loss. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the Laura I thought I knew. She was a stranger, someone who had been living a double life while I was oblivious. For a moment I considered leaving, walking out the door, getting in my car, and driving until I couldn't feel anything anymore. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the wreckage of what used to be my life. I need to know, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Did anyone else know? At the party, I mean? Did they know about you and him? Her silence was deafening. Laura, I pressed, my voice trembling. Did they know? She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with shame. Some of them, she admitted. A few of my coworkers. They knew about Eric, but they didn't know it would come out like this. They didn't know I laughed bitterly, cutting her off. They knew and they still came to celebrate my birthday? What kind of sick joke is this? I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. Sorry, I repeated, shaking my head. You're not sorry, Laura. You're sorry you got caught. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't stay to listen. I turned and walked out the front door, the cool morning air hitting my face as I stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I drove aimlessly again, but this time I wasn't searching for clarity. I knew it wouldn't come so easily. I was running from the house, from her, from the truths that had been forced into the light. My mind churned with questions that had no answers. How many people at the party had known about Laura and Eric? Had they pitied me? Laughed behind my back? The thought made my stomach twist. I ended up at a diner on the outskirts of town. It was a place I used to go to during my college days. A 24-hour hole-in-the-wall with cheap coffee and greasy food. The waitress greeted me with a tired smile as I slid into a booth near the window. I ordered coffee, black, and stared at the cup when it arrived, my reflection rippling on the surface. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me out of my trance. It wasn't Laura this time. It was Adam. Hey, I said, answering quickly, relieved to hear a voice that wasn't hers. Danny, I've been worried about you, he said, his tone laced with concern. You okay? I wanted to say yes to assure him that I was fine, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I sighed heavily. I don't know, Adam. I really don't. Where are you? At the old diner by the highway. Stay there. I'm coming to you. I didn't argue. 15 minutes later, Adam slid into the booth across from me, his presence steady and grounding. He waved off the waitress when she approached, his focus entirely on me. You look like hell, he said bluntly, though his eyes were kind. Thanks, I muttered, taking a sip of the lukewarm coffee. So, did you talk to her? He asked. I nodded, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. Yeah, she admitted to everything. Said it's been going on for months. Months, Adam? My voice broke on the last word, and I clenched my jaw, trying to hold myself together. Adam exhaled sharply, leaning back in the booth. I'm sorry, Danny. I really am. You didn't deserve this. That's not even the worst part, I said bitterly. She told me some of the people at the party knew about it. Her co-workers, apparently. They knew, and they came anyway, smiling, drinking, acting like everything was fine. Adam's expression darkened. What the hell is wrong with people? I don't know, I said, shaking my head. But it makes me wonder, how many of them knew? Were any of my friends in on it? Did they say nothing because they didn't want to get involved? Or because they didn't care? Do you really want to know the answer to that? Adam asked carefully. I don't know, I admitted, but it's eating me alive. I feel like everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie. My marriage, my friends, even my own judgment. How could I have been so blind? Adam leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the table. Listen to me, Danny. None of this is your fault. You trusted her because that's what a marriage is supposed to be. Trust. You didn't do anything wrong by believing in her. His words should have been comforting, but they only made the ache in my chest worse. I don't even know where to start, Adam. What do I do now? Do I confront the people who knew? Do I just move on? Adam frowned, thinking for a moment. I think the first thing you need to do is figure out what you want, not what anyone else thinks you should do. Do you want answers? Do you want to try to fix things with Laura? Or do you want to walk away from all of it? I hesitated, the weight of his questions settling heavily on my shoulders. I don't think I can fix things, I said quietly. Even if she begged for forgiveness, even if she swore it would never happen again. How could I ever trust her? Every time she left the house, every time she picked up her phone, I'd wonder. Adam nodded, his expression serious. Then maybe it's time to start thinking about what life looks like without her. The thought was terrifying. Laura had been such a central part of my life for so long that the idea of living without her felt impossible. But at the same time, the image of her with Eric, the knowledge of her betrayal, made it clear that the life we had shared was already gone. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. You start by taking it one step at a time, Adam said firmly. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just focus on what you need to get through the next day and then the next. And when you're ready, we'll figure out the rest together. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of gratitude for my brother's steady presence. Thanks, Adam. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd manage, he said with a small smile. But I'm glad you don't have to. We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of everything hanging between us. But for the first time since the night before, I felt a small flicker of hope. Hope that, no matter how shattered my life felt right now, I wouldn't have to pick up the pieces alone. The following days were a blur of half-hearted routines and overwhelming emotions. I went through the motions of work and life, but everything felt hollow. The betrayal had created a chasm in my chest that nothing could fill. I avoided Laura entirely, staying at Adam's place for a few nights while I figured out what to do next. She texted every day, long paragraphs pleading for a chance to talk, to explain, to fix what she'd broken. But I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. Not yet. One morning, after another sleepless night, I made a decision. I needed closure. Not just with Laura, but with the whole tangled mess of that night. The only way forward was to confront the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I started with the guest list. Laura had planned the party, so I didn't have an exact count of who was there. But I remembered enough faces to piece together a rough list. Some of the names felt safe. People I'd known for years, people I trusted. But others were question marks. Her coworkers. People who might have known about Eric, about the affair, long before I did. I called a few of my closest friends first. Most were shocked when I told them what had happened, their voices filled with disbelief and anger on my behalf. I had no idea, one of them said, his voice tight with frustration. If I'd known, I would have told you, Danny. You know that, right? I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that at least some of the people in my life had been oblivious, that they hadn't been complicit in Laura's betrayal. But not all the conversations went so smoothly. When I called one of her co-workers, a woman named Allison, the hesitation in her voice was all the confirmation I needed. Danny, I don't know if I should be the one to tell you this, she said carefully. Just tell me the truth, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Did you know about Laura and Eric? There was a long pause, and then she sighed. Yes, I knew. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes as I tried to steady my breathing. How long? I asked quietly. A couple of months, she admitted, but I swear, I didn't know she was going to throw me a party and make out with him in the middle of it. I finished for her, my voice dripping with bitterness. I'm so sorry, Danny, she said quickly. I didn't think it was my place to get involved. I thought, I thought she'd end it before it got this far. Her words felt like salt in the wound. How many people had seen the signs, known the truth, and chosen to stay silent? How many had decided it wasn't their problem? When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of clarity. As painful as it was to hear, I now had the answers I needed. The betrayal wasn't just Laura's, it was a collective failure, a web of silence and complicity that had allowed her lies to fester. That evening, I finally went home to face Laura. She was waiting in the living room when I walked through the door, her face pale and drawn. She stood as I entered, wringing her hands nervously. Danny, she started, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. I don't, I said, holding up a hand. I've heard enough. Her shoulders sagged and tears welled up in her eyes. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, she said softly. But I love you, Danny. I love you, and I want to fix this. I want us to be okay again. I shook my head, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. Love? You call this love? You lied to me, Laura. You betrayed me. And you let everyone around us lie too. I made a mistake, she pleaded. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But it doesn't mean I don't love you. Please, Danny, just give me a chance to prove it. I stared at her, searching her face for some trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But all I saw was a stranger, someone I couldn't trust, someone who had taken the life we'd built together and burned it to the ground. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice breaking. I can't live like this, always wondering, always doubting. It's over, Laura. Her sobs filled the room as I turned and walked toward the stairs. I packed a bag with the essentials, clothes, toiletries, a few personal items, and came back down to find her sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. I'll be staying at Adams for a while, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'll have a lawyer reach out to you about the divorce. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, Danny, don't do this. Don't throw us away. I met her gaze, my own eyes burning with unshed tears. I didn't throw us away, Laura. You did. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I thought I knew. In the weeks that followed, I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. There were moments of anger, moments of grief, and moments of doubt. But there were also glimmers of hope, small reminders that life goes on, even after the worst betrayals. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into my work, and leaned on Adam more than ever. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. The scars Laura left behind would never fully fade, but they became a part of me, a reminder of what I'd endured and the strength I'd found to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future, one where I wasn't defined by betrayal, but by the resilience it had forced me to find.